I never thought my own brother would stoop so low just to make me look bad. But when I heard what Jake said about me at that family dinner, something inside me snapped. It was like a lie so wild, so cruel, I had to decide, stay quiet or tear his whole story apart in front of everyone. What I did next? No one saw it coming. My name is Maureen. Growing up, I always believed my brother Jake, and I were close, more than just siblings, almost like best friends. I remember those endless summer afternoons when we biked down the dusty roads near our house, laughing until our sides hurt. We shared secrets, dreams, even silly nicknames. But that sense of closeness started to slip away the moment Mom got really sick. It was subtle at first, Jake becoming quieter, more withdrawn, but it didn't take long before the distance between us felt like an unbridgeable chasm. I tried to reach out, but he shut me out, locking himself behind a wall I couldn't climb. Then, as if the illness itself wasn't hard enough to face, Jake's behavior took a darker turn. Without warning, he began spreading these horrible rumors about me, like whispers trailing me through every family gathering. At first, I thought maybe it was just hurt feelings, grief twisting us in different directions. But then came the last family reunion, the moment that broke me in a way I didn't expect. Jake stood there, surrounded by relatives I barely saw anymore, and told this story, one so cruel and untrue it felt like a slap across the face. He painted me as the selfish daughter who abandoned Mom in her darkest hours, leaving Jake alone to carry the burden. I felt the weight of every word like a physical blow, my chest tightening, breath catching in my throat. The room blurred around me, the clinking of silverware, the murmurs, even the warm glow of the chandelier above. All faded as that lie settled into the space between us. I remember looking around, searching for someone's eyes, anyone who might see through the facade, but all I found were nods of sympathy for Jake, judgment for me. It was as if the years I spent by Mom's bedside, the nights I stayed awake holding her hand, meant nothing. Every moment erased, replaced by a story that wasn't mine. I felt crushed, as if everything I'd done, everything I'd tried to be for my family, was wiped away with a few careless words. And yet, beneath that heartbreak, a small fire ignited inside me, a stubborn refusal to be defined by his lies. I knew deep down that I couldn't stay silent, couldn't let this false narrative become the truth everyone accepted. But fighting back wasn't just about clearing my name. It meant stepping into a battlefield where family secrets, hidden wounds, and fragile loyalties all waited to explode. I had to decide, do I risk tearing apart what little remained of our family to expose his truth? Or do I keep pretending, swallowing the pain, and letting him win? That question haunted me, even as the echoes of his words lingered in the room long after the reunion ended. It all started so innocently, or at least it seemed that way at first, a seemingly harmless text message from my cousin that in reality felt like a sharp, sudden blow to my chest. I remember the exact moment I saw it, how my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was making coffee. I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked it up without thinking twice. The screen lit up with a message from her. Simple words, but heavy with meaning. Did you hear what Jake said about you at the reunion? For a split second, my mind blanked, the words hovering there, waiting for me to comprehend their weight. Then an icy chill spread through my body, like a slow poison crawling from my fingertips all the way up to my throat. My heart sank deep into my chest, and I felt a knot tightening so painfully that I almost dropped the phone. I sat down at the worn wooden kitchen table, the surface cool against my palms, and stared at the message again, almost afraid to believe what it implied. How could Jake say anything bad about me? Of all people, after everything we'd been through as siblings, after Mom had gotten so sick, after the long, hard nights. But that was exactly what he did. What I would later come to learn was a cruel, deliberate lie, A story Jake spun to make it seem like I had abandoned Mom when she needed me the most. He told everyone that I was nowhere to be found during those terrible months, that I left him alone to deal with everything by himself, like I was some stranger rather than his sister. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The memories flooded in, the long, endless days in the hospital waiting room, the sterile smell of antiseptic and hospital gowns, the faint hum of machines beeping softly in the background. I remembered sitting by Mom's bedside until my eyes burned with exhaustion, rubbing her hand gently, whispering words of comfort when she was too weak to speak. I remembered the sleepless nights, pacing the dimly lit hallways, clutching my phone for updates, trying to hold it together. Every moment I was there, physically, emotionally, relentlessly trying to be the daughter and sister Mom needed. But no one was asking me. No one wanted to hear my side. It was as if Jake's story was the only truth that mattered. I felt invisible, erased, like a ghost in my own family story. The worst part wasn't just the lie itself, but the way it spread, quietly, like a shadow creeping into every conversation, coloring every glance and every hushed whisper behind my back. The next family gathering was the hardest. I walked into the room, bright and hopeful, desperate to find some normalcy, but the air shifted instantly. I could feel it before I even saw it, the sideways glances, the quick exchanges between relatives, the barely concealed judgment in their eyes. My own family looked at me like I was a stranger, a villain in a story I hadn't even been invited to tell. I caught Aunt Carol's eyes flick away, a tight smile playing on her lips as if she was trying not to say something cruel. Cousins whispered and giggled, casting brief but cutting looks in my direction. And there he was, Jake, standing tall with a smug smile plastered across his face, like he had just won some twisted game that no one else knew the rules to. My heart pounded painfully in my chest, rage and helplessness battling inside me. I wanted to confront him then and there, to shout at him in front of everyone, and demand that he stop poisoning the family with his lies. But there was something inside me, an uneasy voice of reason that urged patience, that told me to hold back, to be smarter than anger could make me. I knew I needed proof, something concrete and undeniable, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the truth, about something far bigger than sibling rivalry. It was about family, loyalty, and the bonds that were already beginning to fracture under the weight of his betrayal. So I started to dig. I went through old messages on my phone, rereading texts I'd sent Mom during her illness. I scoured through photos, some blurry, some painfully clear, capturing moments I had forgotten, moments where I was undeniably there. I found hospital records I'd kept, faded paperwork tucked away in a drawer that confirmed every appointment, every visit I had made. Each piece of evidence was like a lifeline, something tangible I could hold on to amidst the storm of accusations. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Jake's story was not just hurtful, it was a complete fabrication, a cruel mask he wore to shame me and cover up his own mistakes and shortcomings. The lies he told weren't just about me. They were a desperate attempt to rewrite history, to hide the truth of his own failures from everyone else. But exposing him, that meant risking everything. The fragile peace in our family, the relationships I still treasured, and even my own sense of security. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, the house wrapped in a heavy silence, the kind that makes every small sound feel amplified. I was in the hallway when I heard Jake's voice drifting through the thin walls, low and nervous, shaking with an edge of fear I'd never heard before. He was on the phone, and the words he spoke shattered the last illusion I had of him. Yeah, he admitted quietly, almost pleadingly, I made it up. I just needed people to feel sorry for me, to believe my side of the story. It's the only way I could control things. I pressed myself against the wall, breath catching painfully in my throat as I listened. The vulnerability in his voice, the confession, was like a dark key unlocking a door I hadn't dared open. In that moment, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. But even as the fire of determination burned inside me, a new, terrifying question took root. How do you expose someone when everyone already believes their lies? The answer didn't come to me in one loud, dramatic moment. It crept in slowly, like a whisper I kept ignoring until it became impossible to shut out. The more I tried to understand why people believed Jake's version of our family story so easily, the clearer it became. It wasn't just the lie itself. It was Jake. He knew how to tell it. He was charming, composed, and knew exactly how to tug at the heartstrings just enough to earn sympathy without looking pitiful. He cried at the right times, laughed through the pain, and acted like he was carrying this invisible weight with stoic strength. People wanted to believe him because he made them feel like they were part of something noble, something tragic and meaningful. And I was too quiet, too exhausted. My grief made me messy, unfiltered, raw. When people looked at Jake, they saw a brother holding the family together. When they looked at me, they saw someone who didn't try hard enough to fix it. But something deeper was at play, and I started to see it with painful clarity. Jake wasn't just spinning lies to paint himself the hero. He was hiding from something deeper, something that went far beyond me. It wasn't about me at all, not really. The root of it all was guilt, the kind that festers in the dark when you're too afraid to face it. Jake had buried a secret years ago, one that had gnawed away at his conscience, and he was using me as a shield from it. I became the villain in his story not because I was guilty, but because he was. I couldn't unhear what I'd overheard him say that night on the phone. His voice was still etched in my memory. Low, shaky, full of regret he didn't want anyone else to see. I just needed people to feel sorry for me. It was the only way I could control things. Control. That was the key. He didn't just want to be believed. He needed to control the narrative because the truth was too painful for him to admit. So I made a choice. One that scared me more than anything. I decided to use that truth, not as a weapon of revenge, but as a scalpel to slice through the layers of illusion he had wrapped around himself and everyone else. But I knew I couldn't go into it swinging wildly. I had to be strategic, deliberate. This wasn't a confrontation. It was surgery, and it had to be precise. I waited until the next family dinner, a monthly gathering we'd been doing since before Mom passed, held at my aunt and uncle's large, outdated colonial house on the edge of town. Their dining room was always too bright, lit with a chandelier that cast shadows on the pale green walls and shimmered off the mismatched crystal glasses set at every place. The table was long, polished oak, set with linen napkins and old silverware that clinked against the china like it had something to say. That night, I walked in with my back straight and a small envelope tucked inside my bag. My palms were sweating and my heart was thudding in my ears, but I forced a smile, hugging people one by one while mentally preparing myself. Jake, as usual, was already there, laughing quietly with a few cousins, playing the part of the charming older brother to perfection. He gave me a brief nod, as if the storm between us had never existed. That nod made something hot rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Not yet. We ate dinner, roast beef, potatoes, peas, and bread rolls, and I barely tasted a thing. I kept watching the people around me, studying their faces, trying to find cracks in their expressions, any signs that they might be open to hearing a truth that didn't come with a pretty smile. I caught my cousin Lisa glancing at me, almost like she wanted to say something. My aunt avoided my eyes entirely. Jake, on the other hand, looked smug and comfortable, like he'd already won. After dessert was served and coffee was poured, I stood up slowly. My hands shook just slightly, but I steadied them by clutching the back of my chair. Conversations began to hush. People turned toward me, surprised. I never usually spoke during these dinners. That was always Jake's arena, but this time it was mine. I need to say something, I began, my voice surprisingly steady. And I hope you'll let me finish before you make any judgments. There was a pause, awkward, uncertain, but no one stopped me. Jake raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I know there's been talk, I continued, about what happened when Mom was sick. And I know some of you have heard things about how I wasn't there. How I supposedly left Jake to take care of everything on his own. I scanned the room. No one met my gaze. A few sipped their coffee nervously. That story, I said, voice tightening, is not true. It never was. I was there. I sat with Mom every day. I slept on hospital chairs and missed weeks of work. I wiped her tears, fed her soup, read her the same book over and over just to distract her from the pain. But I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think I needed to prove it. I thought family would know who I was. Someone at the far end of the table shifted uncomfortably. I opened my bag and pulled out the envelope. Slowly, I placed its contents on the table, printed text messages between me and Mom, photos of me holding her hand in the hospital, timestamps, doctor's notes where I had signed her in or requested updates. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, clinical, factual. But then I said, that's just my side. Now here's Jake's. His name hit the room like thunder. He stiffened across the table. Marine, he said under his breath, a warning. But I held up a hand. I'm not doing this to humiliate you, I said quietly, locking eyes with him. I'm doing this because I can't carry the weight of your guilt anymore. A hushed silence fell over the table. I know what you told people. I know why you did it. Because you've been carrying something too. But instead of facing it, you turned me into the villain. You needed control. You needed sympathy. And so you lied. Jake opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face turned pale. I took a shaky breath and continued. You all thought Jake was the one who stayed. But the truth is, Jake left. For nearly 3 weeks while Mom was in hospice care, he disappeared. No calls, no visits, just gone. I covered for him because I thought he was grieving. I never told anyone because I wanted to protect him. But he used that time, that absence, to rewrite the whole story. I slid one last photo onto the table, a dated screenshot of a conversation he had with someone I knew. In it, he admitted he'd needed a break, that it was all too much, that he couldn't handle watching her fade. I can't take seeing her like that, he wrote. Let Maureen do it. She always was stronger. The room went utterly still. The only sound was the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Jake's mask cracked. The confident posture collapsed slightly, his shoulders dropping as if someone had punched the wind out of him. He looked at the envelope, at the photos, at the texts, then at me, and I saw it. Shame. Pure, undeniable shame. The truth, after all this time, was finally out, raw, painful, and undeniable. The relief that washed over me that night was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. It wasn't just emotional, it was physical. I felt it in my shoulders, which had unknowingly hunched from months of silent defensiveness, slowly beginning to lower. I felt it in my chest, where a dull ache had taken residence for so long, finally starting to ease as if I could draw a full breath again. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could look around the room and not feel like a stranger in my own skin. But it wasn't just about relief. It was something more sacred, something I hadn't even dared to hope for. I hadn't just defended myself that night. I had told the truth, and not just to protect my own name, but to pull the curtain back on a story that had been slowly corroding the roots of our family from within. I had broken the silence, shattered the unspoken rule that said, keep the peace, even if it means swallowing the poison. That poison, Jake's lie, had seeped into everything. Our Sunday dinners, our group chats, our holidays. I hadn't even realized how deeply it had spread until I saw the looks of stunned recognition on my relatives' faces when I laid the truth bare. Some had their mouths slightly open, as if catching their breath. Others stared at their plates, unable or unwilling to process what was happening in real time. And then there was Jake, my brother, my blood, sitting across the table like a statue of someone he used to be. He didn't speak, not a single word. Even as the last photo fluttered onto the table, even as the silence expanded like fog across the room, he sat there, frozen. He looked down at his lap, lips parted but motionless. No denial, no apology, no reaction at all. Just that quiet, almost stunned stillness that you only see when someone's carefully constructed world begins to crumble from within. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to see something change in him. It didn't happen overnight. There was no grand apology, no tearful confrontation where he begged for forgiveness. That would have been too easy, too cinematic. Instead, what came was something more human, more flawed and real. Jake stopped trying to win the room. His usual smugness faded. He no longer dominated conversations or slid in passive jabs when I walked into a space. He became quieter, measured, more present in a way that made me feel he was finally listening, even if he still couldn't find the words to say what needed to be said. I remember seeing him a few weeks later at another gathering, a smaller one at Aunt Sheila's. The air still felt heavy, like we were all figuring out how to rearrange ourselves around this new truth. But there was Jake, helping her in the kitchen without being asked, quietly folding napkins, asking her how she'd been sleeping. It was subtle, but I noticed it. He wasn't performing anymore. He was trying. He glanced over at me once during dinner. Just a glance. But it lingered longer than it had to. And in that silence, I read something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not guilt, not shame, but understanding. A kind of wordless acknowledgement that said, I know what I did. I know what it cost you. But even with Jake's softening, the aftermath wasn't easy. There was still tension. Of course there was. You don't unravel a lie that's been deeply rooted in people's minds without some fallout. Some family members, particularly the older ones, were hesitant to speak to me directly after that night. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe they just didn't know how to face the fact that they believed something so wrong. Aunt Carol still avoided eye contact when we crossed paths. Uncle Roy tried to pretend nothing had ever happened, cracking the same tired jokes, like always. My cousin Lisa, though, she hugged me a little tighter than usual, held on a little longer. And when I pulled away, she whispered, I'm sorry. I should have asked you first. That moment meant more than she'll ever know. Even now, months later, some family dynamics remain strained. There's an awkwardness in the air at gatherings, like everyone's trying to find a new rhythm now that the old, false one has been destroyed. Sometimes I walk into a room and still feel a flicker of judgment, or worse, that hesitant kindness people give when they're not sure if they were on the wrong side of something. But I've learned not to take it all personally, because I'm proud of what I did, truly deeply proud, not in a boastful way, but in a grounded, soul-deep way that you only earn when you stand tall in the middle of a storm you didn't create and refuse to be washed away. When you speak up, even when your voice shakes. When you show proof not to destroy someone but to protect yourself and reclaim what never should have been taken from you in the first place, your truth, your integrity, your peace. I learned something through all of this. something I think I always knew but didn't want to face until I had no other choice. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that take place not with strangers or enemies, but with the people who share your blood, the ones who were supposed to be your first friends, the ones you sat next to at dinner for years, believing they had your back, the ones who can hurt you not because they don't know you, but because they do. That betrayal cuts differently, deeper, quieter. And healing from it, well, it doesn't look like in the movies. There are no dramatic reconciliations, no perfect closure. Just slow, halting steps, just tiny gestures, just moments where you choose to breathe, to rise above, to let go, but not forget. Looking back now, after everything that's happened, after the silence, the whispers, the confrontation, and the quiet that followed, I can say this with certainty. I'm glad I didn't let Jake's version of my story become the story. For a while, I almost did. I almost let the weight of his words crush me beneath the burden of proving myself. I almost let the shame he manufactured silence the voice I barely had the strength to use. There were moments, so many of them, when I lay awake at night, replaying every accusation in my head like a broken record. I would stare at the ceiling in my dark room, listening to the wind rattle the window panes, and ask myself, what if no one ever sees the truth? What if this lie becomes my legacy in their eyes? The thought would squeeze the air out of my lungs like an invisible hand. I didn't just want justice. I wanted to be seen, really seen, for who I was and what I had done when it mattered most. And now, with time stretching out between that night and this moment, I realized something more profound. Sometimes, exposing the truth means illuminating not just someone else's lies, but the hidden corners within yourself, the parts of your soul that are scared, the parts that learned long ago that keeping quiet kept the peace. The parts that were told not to make a scene, to just move on, to be the bigger person. But healing doesn't come from silence. It never has. I had to look at the ugliest parts of our family, the resentment, the denial, the favoritism, the fear, and call them by their names. Not to shame them, but to strip them of their power. And that took more strength than I knew I had. I remember one evening, a few weeks after it all unfolded, I took a walk alone down the road behind my house. It was cold, the kind of crisp chill that makes your breath visible and your thoughts clearer. I could hear the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. And with each step, I felt lighter. Not because everything was perfect, because it wasn't, but because for once, I wasn't carrying something that didn't belong to me. There's something unspoken that happens when you stop trying to defend yourself against lies and instead begin to speak the truth out loud. People shift. Some pull away. Others come closer. The air changes. You find yourself surrounded not by people who like you, but by people who see you. The ones who had the courage to reconsider what they thought they knew. The ones who say, I didn't know. I'm sorry. The ones who choose to stay, even after the curtain's been pulled back, and the pretty version of the family is no longer intact. And that's the kind of truth I've learned to value, not the kind that comforts everyone, but the kind that heals me. If you've ever found yourself cornered by a lie someone told about you, especially from someone close, someone whose voice carries weight, you'll understand what I mean. It's not just about setting the record straight. It's about reclaiming the space that lie tried to steal. Your space, your dignity, your voice. There's something quiet but fierce that rises up when you decide to speak anyway. When you walk into a room full of doubting eyes and trembling silence and say, this is what really happened. It doesn't come with applause. Often, it comes with awkward silence and a few turned backs. But it also comes with freedom. And once you taste that kind of freedom, no lie, no matter how pretty, how popular, or how long it's lived, can ever hold you again. What Jake did hurt me. There's no denying that. But in some strange, complicated way, it also woke me up. It forced me to examine Not just what was said about me, but what I believed about myself. For too long, I measured my worth through the lens of how easily I could be misunderstood. Now, I measure it by how bravely I tell the truth, even when it costs me comfort. And if you're reading or listening to this, and you're where I was feeling like someone else is holding the pen to your life story, let me tell you something. They don't get to decide your ending. You do. You hold that pen. No matter how messy the middle has been, no matter how many pages someone else tried to write for you, the final word is yours. Sometimes that means standing up, not with rage, not with vengeance, but with truth. Sometimes it means standing in front of the very people who doubted you, dismissed you, or rewrote your pain, and saying, I won't be erased. Because here's what I know now, deep in my bones, something I wish I had believed from the beginning. The truth, it always finds a way out.